The tumultuous ending to Claudine Gay's stint as Harvard president is still reverberating through the university. And as GBH's Kirk Carapezza reports, many professors are warning her resignation, quote, signals a dangerous intrusion of partisan politics into American higher ed. Kirk Carapezza joins me now, along with Attorney Harvey Silverglate, co-founder of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, and Ryan Enos, a professor of government at Harvard. Thank you all for being here. So, Kirk, if you can just give us a real quick sort of debrief from your reporting. It was a great piece, really extensive, but what's the vibe right now?
Sure. So the Gay's resignation kind of has sparked this debate on campus about, you know, the quote-unquote rise of authoritarianism kind of creeping into higher education. And we thought it would be an interesting idea to kind of dig into that a little bit and see whether there's any merit to it. So on one side, you have professors saying, you know, this signals this intrusion of partisan politics into higher education, a space where it doesn't belong, right? And on the other hand, you have free speech advocates and civil libertarians like Harvey who say that, you know, that's overblown and that's opportunistic.
Right, Ryan, I want to ask you, you know, what is the feeling at Harvard right now? How are professors feeling, and in higher education in general? What is kind of the sentiment? Is there that fear? Does that exist?
Yeah, it definitely exists. I mean, I think there's a fear that these university presidents were brought down through intrusion in partisan politics, very, very directly from these attacks by Congress and some of their allies. And the concern is that it really has these echoes to things in the past, like McCarthyism in the United States, and attempts and successful attempts at when this has happened in other countries, where there's been this interference with higher education. And it's been damaging not only to higher education, but frankly to democracy.
Yeah, you actually played this in your radio piece, but it's a clip of Joseph McCarthy in a 1952 RNC speech talking about just that.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many. Even if there are only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
So there's a historical precedent. I mean, even in the last few years, we've seen decline in democracy as tracked by this pro-democracy nonprofit Freedom House. I think they tallied 17 consecutive years of decline in democracy worldwide. We've seen incidents in Hungary, in Ukraine, where speech has been limited in higher education and in academia, and it's well documented that academia and, you know, it is a threat to an authoritarian regime because it might create critical thinking, which could then question that. What do you think? You're saying this is just not...
It's nonsense.
Okay.
I do think the world is facing a serious problem with the rise of authoritarianism, as is this country, by the way. You look at what's going on, the contest for the president. The fact that Donald Trump became president of the United States is a statement about the rise of authoritarianism in this country. However, the situation with Claudine Gay has nothing to do with that. She appeared to testify in front of the congressional committee run by a Harvard alum, by the way. And she was asked a very sensible question to which she gave, I think, an accurate answer. It was about free speech on campus and, you know, the Palestinian demonstrations. Those demonstrations were 100% constitutionally protected. The only time they would not be is if they ended up, you know, if they turned into a riot. And she answered the question that this was an excess of free speech. When Stefanik followed up, she couldn't explain, and the reason she couldn't explain it, she didn't really believe it. Her history as an administrator was that she had these diversity, equity, and inclusion seminars for students and even faculty members. I mean, I have a brochure that she circulated to some senior faculty members who were friends of mine, inviting them to show up for diversity training. If I was on the Harvard faculty and I got this, I would put obscene words on it and send it back to the dean's office. She was at the time a dean. These are faculty members being trained. Really, she was not the right choice. And I could have named 12 choices better for the Harvard faculty. That if they wanted diversity, if they wanted a black woman, there are some fabulous black women in academia, including some at Harvard. And then they picked a bureaucrat. It was a terrible error.
There is diversity, and then there's equity, right? And when we talk about equity, we talk about, giving someone an advantage so that they can have the same opportunity as somebody who already has that, right? And often, I think you have to factor in, none of these things are happening in a vacuum, right? The status quo. So when you're looking at this country and you're thinking about the motivations behind people, questioning, you can see the consequences for people who have been pro-Palestine have, at large, been much more severe than people who are pro-Israel, right? And I wish we had a little more nuance in that conversation. But I think that, when she's talking about these protests as well, you don't think that there was any kind of intentional, maybe, attack against her from, billionaire hedge fund managers and established government? Like, these people are coming at her, yes. And then they come out with the...
Let me say this. When you have powerful enemies like that, you have to be very careful what you say. She was not sufficiently careful. I mean, it's as simple as that. They were right. They were right. She gave them an excuse to get rid of her. She cut her own throat.
Well, I wonder what you mean about the diversity equity thing, right? Because
I think, there's a whole group of people in this country who would like people in positions of authority, especially in the colleges, all of whom look different, but all of whom think alike. You can't do it that way. You can have people who look different, but they have to think differently as well.
Well, yeah, I guess it's if the status quo, if we're accepting that it's this acceptance that the status quo is male and is white. Would you say that that's wrong?
Let me tell you, I am not an acceptant of the status quo.
Yeah. I'm
fine being an upsetter of the status quo. But I think the status quo has to be sensible and has to appeal to the majority of America, has to be sensible enough to be explained to the American people and accepted by them, including the alumni body of Harvard.
I feel like there are so many different things happening here, and there's a lack of nuance that really bothers me about this whole conversation, right, where we're talking this and like DEI in contrast with the constitutional right to free speech, right? There was this. You talked about just in your radio reporting, students who were asking a U.S. government entity to investigate Harvard, right. Represented by the Muslim Legal Fund, saying that they've been subjected to racism and harassment on campus. Jewish right. students have issued a similar complaint. They're asking for government intervention. Right. How does that square with academic freedom? Yeah. So for our story, we tried to look beyond just Claudine Gay's forced resignation and look at, what some professors and researchers are describing as this playbook, right? This authoritarianism playbook that we've seen, Ryan, your research has shown, like in other countries, this is played out, whether it's Hungary, Russia, Ukraine. And we spoke with a researcher at the New School, Jessica Pisano. She studies authoritarianism in Eastern Europe, in countries like Russia and Ukraine, Hungary, where, they're imposing, it starts with censorship. You things like you can't say poverty in the classroom, which she equates to, don't say gay in Florida. But then it ends with, forcing an entire university to leave Budapest and decamp to Vienna, right? That may sound extreme, but professors like Ryan and other professors are saying we should be on guard right now, that we should not just think that, America is exceptional and that because we have a history of democracy that we're immune to these similar kinds of threats. And in many ways, the playbook is to draw all of us into these wedge issues and debate things like free speech and DEI. And that by getting pulled into the wedge issues, then no one's minding the store, right? No one wants to be, fewer and fewer people want these jobs as college presidents because you have a target on your back all the time. So the playbook is, bury universities in paperwork and bureaucracy, draw them into these debates, about wedge issues that don't actually have anything to do with the mission of the university. I'm hesitant to even get into this because I recognize, based on what she said, that it is a wedge issue. But talking about plagiarism, now you've said absolutely we have to have a higher standard for that. Right, after finding that out about Claudine Gay, we referenced sort of vaguely the billionaire hedge fund manager who was really leading the charge against Gay, Bill Ackman. It was later found out that his wife, Neri Oxman, she had been a professor at MIT, and she had been found to do a very similar, almost exactly the same kind of plagiarism, right? And so if he had said that we're going to launch this investigation, and I hope that he does, but at the same time, how would that work? Like, how would you determine what's a serious thing versus incidental, right? Or what rises to the level of punishment and what that punishment would be? So maybe that is just another wedge issue, that something is, but these things come up more and more, and yeah, I guess it's just like a thousand little...
And one of the ways that researchers are advising American academics are to say to learn from Ukrainian academics, where they're fighting back. Literally, they're being, their institutions are being bombed. They're under constant attack, and academic freedom is under threat, but it's not on the decline in Ukraine. They're managing to fight back, and what they've done is researchers there have basically settled on standards and saying these are the things we can all agree on. Right, we might disagree about DEI and certain free speech debates and things like that, but we can all agree that this is why we're here and this is why it's important to fight for democracy.
Right, and I think we can all agree there's a difference between free speech and hate speech, right?
Well, no, there is not. We don't all agree. Hate speech is 100% constitutionally protected. Not only is it protected, but it's very important. I was a Jewish kid from Brooklyn at Princeton in 1960-64. It was very important for me. It was 52% of white Southern boys south of the Mason-Dixon line. The anti-Semitism was palpable. I really wanted to know who hated me, so I knew who not to turn my back on. How do you find out who hates you? You constitutionally protect hate speech. I am 100% in favor of allowing hate speech. Not hate violence, but hate speech.
Okay, so it would be constitutionally protected because it...
Not would be, it is. I'm an expert in that.
That's, yeah. Okay.
Trust me.
I mean, I know, you can't yell like, yeah, you're right. There are some gray areas there as well, for sure.
People say you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Not true. If there's a fire, you have to yell fire. It's falsely yelling fire in a crowded theater.
Yes.
I think what we're seeing is, of course, these sort of debates on a place like a college campus are complex. Like what crosses a line into harassment or hate speech or something. This is what Claudine Gay was getting targeted for, was trying to answer that question. This is what she was brought down for. And it's a complex question because people have a right to be secure in their education and not to feel like they're being targeted. But I 100% agree with Harvey about protecting speech. I mean, we're on the same page about this, 100%. The problem is when something like Republicans in Congress, or anybody in Congress, doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans or anybody, come in and attack universities when they're trying to figure out those issues. Harvard is trying to figure out the complexities of those things and trying to give students an education and trying to protect speech and trying to do all those difficult things that universities do, but when they're under attack by outside political forces, it doesn't actually allow them to do it. It doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, I mean, this is an incredibly complicated conversation, and all of those little pieces and like making the little cracks, right? It removes some of the nuance. Yeah. So I hope that we can continue to understand, and your reporting has really reflected that. So thank you, Kirk Carapezza, Harvey Silverglate, and Ryan Enos. Thank you so much for being here.